The crystal moon pack's grand hall blazed with silver light as hundreds of wolves gathered for the annual mate gathering, their finest silks and jewels reflecting the chandeliers above like scattered stars. Everywhere Sarah looked, elegant she-wolves preened and postured, each one vying for attention, for status, for the chance to be seen. Sarah, meanwhile, was on her hands and knees behind a decorative screen, scrubbing wine stains from marble that had likely cost more than she'd earned in a lifetime. She had no pack status to offer, no powerful bloodline to boast of. She was Omega, the lowest rank, rejected by her birth pack for being too weak, cast out at age 23. Now she served the Crystal Moon Pack as little more than a servant, cleaning up after wolves who wouldn't meet her gaze, dismissed except when they needed something. 2 more hours, Sarah muttered to herself, wringing out her cloth. Just 2 more hours until this spectacle ends. She sat back, pushing a strand of silver blonde hair from her face as her attention drifted across the hall. Alpha King Aldrich stood at the center of attention, his powerful presence commanding the room even in stillness. But it wasn't the Alpha King who caught Sarah's eye. It was the young man standing alone in the shadows near the eastern colonnade, Prince Kale, the Alpha King's only son, heir to the Crystal Moon throne, and the most isolated wolf Sarah had ever seen. He stood rigid, his dark hair falling over gray eyes that tracked the crowd with careful wariness. Noble families flowed around him like water around stone, present, aware, but never quite touching, never quite acknowledging. Sarah had seen it happen all evening. A duchess would begin to approach, then veer away as if suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. A group of young wolves would glance his way, then immediately turn their backs, resuming conversation as if he didn't exist. Even the servants avoided him, setting down refreshments nearby, but never directly handing them to him, never meeting his gaze. Prince Kale was mute, had been since birth, according to the whispers Sarah had overheard in the kitchens. Some said it was a curse. Others claimed it was shame, that the moon goddess herself had stolen his voice as punishment for some unnamed sin. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. The heir to the most powerful pack in the territories was treated like a ghost in his own home. As Sarah watched, a young noble Lord Davrin, she thought, walked directly toward the prince, seemingly about to speak. Kale's shoulders tensed with anticipation, his hand rising slightly as if to respond. But Davrin passed right by without a glance, addressing the wolf standing 3 feet to Kale's left instead. The hope in Kale's expression died. His hand dropped. Something in Sarah's chest twisted painfully. She knew that look, had worn it herself countless times, the expression of someone so accustomed to being overlooked that they'd stopped expecting anything different. The bone-deep weariness of transparent existence. Before she could think better of it, Sarah found herself standing, abandoning her cleaning supplies. Her pulse quickened as she crossed the floor, weaving between clusters of chatting wolves who didn't spare her a glance. Just as well. What she was about to do would either be seen as foolishly bold or utterly inappropriate. Probably both. Prince Kale didn't notice her approach. His attention was fixed somewhere in the middle distance, his expression carefully blank in that way that meant he was feeling too much. Sarah stopped a respectful 3 feet away and did something she'd seen no one else do all evening. She waited, deliberately, visibly, until he looked at her. When his gray eyes finally met hers, there was confusion there, suspicion, even, as if he couldn't quite believe someone was actually standing there, seeing him. Sarah took a breath, lifted her hands, and signed, "Good evening, Your Highness." Kale froze. His lips parted in shock. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and Sarah felt heat creeping up her neck. Maybe this had been a terrible idea. Maybe he didn't even know sign language. Maybe his hands moved, hesitant and disbelieving. You can sign? Sarah's face broke into a smile. I can. My younger brother was born deaf 16 years ago. When I was 10, our grandmother taught us both sign language before she left the pack. Something transformed in Cale's expression. The careful blankness shattered, revealing raw, almost painful hope underneath. His next signs came faster, more urgent. No one here signs. They don't. No one even tries. I noticed. Sarah signed back, her own chest tight with shared frustration. That's shameful. A sound escaped Cale, not quite a laugh, but close. His hands flew through signs now, the words tumbling out with the desperation of someone who'd been silent too long. They think I'm cursed, broken. The Alpha King's disappointment. You're not. Sarah signed with intensity. You're just speaking a language they're too lazy to learn. This time, Cale did laugh, a breathy, rusty sound that suggested he didn't do it often. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to remember himself, signing instead. What's your name? Sarah. I'm... She hesitated, then decided honesty was better than pretense. I'm Omega. I work in the kitchens. She braced herself for the moment his expression would change, for the polite withdrawal, the sudden remembering of somewhere else he needed to be. It was what always happened when wolves learned her rank, but Cale's face only softened. Omega, he signed slowly, thoughtfully. Then, they overlook you too. It wasn't a question. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest, the recognition of a kindred spirit. Every day, she admitted. Then we're the same, Cale signed, and his slight smile was the saddest thing Sarah had ever seen. Royal and Omega, both invisible. They stood there for a moment, two souls in a room full of wolves who couldn't see them. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She'd spent years being ignored, and the first person to truly see her was a prince who supposedly couldn't speak. Excuse me. A sharp voice cut through their bubble of understanding. You there. Omega. Sarah turned to find Lady Morgana, one of the Alpha King's advisors, bearing down on them, her expression glacial. Behind her, several other nobles were watching with obvious disapproval. What exactly do you think you're doing? Morgana demanded, her tone dripping with disdain. Bothering the prince with your... She waved dismissively at Sarah's signing hands. Whatever that is. I wasn't bothering, Sarah began. The prince doesn't need servants accosting him at formal gatherings, Morgana continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken. Now, remove yourself before I have you removed. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She felt Cale's hand suddenly on her arm, a gentle touch, grounding. When she looked at him, he was signing urgently. Don't. It's not worth it. I'm used to this. That was somehow worse than the dismissal itself. You shouldn't have to be, Sarah signed back. Cale's expression flickered with something gratitude, maybe, or sorrow. Thank you, he signed. For seeing me. Before Sarah could respond, Lady Morgana grasped her shoulder firmly. I said move along, Omega. Sarah let herself be pulled away, but not before catching the look on Cale's face, that terrible resignation settling back over his features like a familiar cloak. The invisible prince, returning to his shadows, as Morgana deposited her back behind the decorative screens with a warning about knowing her place. Sarah's hands were still trembling. Not with fear, with anger, with helpless frustration at a world that could discard people so easily, that could look at a prince and see nothing, that could look at her and see less than nothing. She returned to her scrubbing, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying every sign, every expression on Cale's face, the surprise, the hope, the brief, shining moment of connection before the world reminded them both of their places. Nearby, two kitchen maids huddled together, watching the prince's distant figure. He can't help being mute, I suppose, one murmured. Sarah bit her tongue. remembering Lady Morgana's threat. She thought of her younger brother Finn, working the construction sites to help support them both, all they had left of family, working himself to exhaustion so they could both survive. Before she could dwell on it further, a commanding voice echoed through the hall. "Attention, please." Alpha King Aldrich stood at the center of the room, his powerful presence silencing the crowd instantly. Sarah's chest tightened. This was it, the announcement everyone had been waiting for all evening. "My wolves," Aldrich began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the space. "Tonight marks an important moment for our pack, for our kingdom. As many of you know, it is time to secure the future of our bloodline, to ensure stability and strength for generations to come." Sira watched Kyle from across the room. His expression was carefully neutral, but his hands were clenched at his sides. After much consideration, Aldrich continued, "I have made a decision regarding my heir." The crowd leaned in, eager. Sira held her breath. "My son, Prince Kyle, will be bonded in mating to Lady Isadora of the Northern Reach. The ceremony will take place in 3 days' time." Gasps rippled through the crowd, not of joy, but of surprise. Sira's stomach dropped as a beautiful, cold-eyed she-wolf stepped forward from the crowd, her smile triumphant. Lady Isadora was everything Sarah wasn't: powerful, titled, dripping with confidence and status. And Kale looked like he'd been struck. His face had gone pale, his expression stricken. He signed something sharp and desperate toward his father, but Aldrich either didn't see it or chose not to acknowledge it, instead gesturing for Isadora to approach. "This union will strengthen our pack's alliances and ensure capable leadership for our throne," Aldrich announced. "I expect all of you to welcome Lady Isadora as the future Luna of Crystal Moon." Applause erupted, but Sira couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears. She watched Kale's hands move again, signing something that looked like, "No, please, wait," but no one was watching him. All eyes were on Isadora as she swept toward the prince with predatory grace. When she reached him, she placed one perfectly manicured hand on his arm. Kale flinched. Isadora's smile never wavered, but Sira saw the contempt in her eyes, the possessive cruelty in how her fingers tightened on his sleeve. "This isn't right," Sira thought desperately. "He doesn't want this. Can anyone else see?" But of course they couldn't. Or they could, and simply didn't care. Kale was transparent to them in the ways that mattered most: his thoughts, his feelings, his autonomy. He was a chess piece, a symbol, a tool for political maneuvering, never a person. Their eyes met across the crowded hall one more time. In his gaze, Sarah saw a desperate, silent plea, though for what, she couldn't say. Help? Understanding? Witness? She signed back, small enough that only he might see. "I see you." Something shifted in his expression, relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. He signed back, quick and covert. "Thank you." Then Lady Isadora turned his face away, claiming his attention, and the moment shattered. Sarah returned to her scrubbing, her throat tight with unshed tears. She'd spent years being dismissed, had made peace with her status as someone no one noticed or cared about. But somehow, in the space of one evening, one conversation, that had changed. Because Kale had seen her too, had recognized her, had called her an equal, when the entire world insisted they were nothing alike. And across the hall, standing in the golden light of the chandeliers, Kale's new betrothed leaned close and whispered in his ear with venomous sweetness, "You'll learn to obey me, mute prince, one way or another." After all, her smile was all teeth. Who would believe you if you tried to complain? Kale's face remained expressionless, but his hands trembled where only Sarah, watching from the shadows, could see them sign a single silent word into the space between their bodies. Help. The morning after the mate gathering, Sarah woke to shouting in the servants' quarters. She stumbled out of bed, still groggy, to find Maven the head cook and the closest thing Sarah had to family in the palace standing in her doorway with a grim expression. "There's been an accident," Maven said without preamble. "Your brother." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Finn? What happened?" "He fell from scaffolding at the construction site. Broke his leg badly. And," Maven hesitated, "he hit his head. The healer says he'll recover, but it'll take weeks, maybe months of expensive treatment." The world tilted. Finn, her sweet, gentle younger brother, deaf since birth, the reason she'd learned sign language in the first place, the only family she had left. "I need to see him," Sarah said, already pulling on her work clothes. "I'll cover for you with the steward," Maven promised. "But Sarah, you need to think about how you'll pay for his healing. The herbal treatments alone will cost more than you make in 6 months. Sarah's hands shook as she tied her apron. She knew Maven was right. The palace paid Omegas barely enough to survive, let alone save. And now, "I'll figure something out," she said, though she had no idea what. She spent the morning at the healer's cottage, holding Finn's hand as he drifted in and out of fevered sleep, his leg wrapped and splinted, a bandage around his head. He was so young, barely 16, and so vulnerable. "I have to go," Sarah signed against his unconscious palm, tears streaming down her face. "But I promise, I'll come back, with enough to save you. I promise." By the time she returned to the palace, it was early afternoon, 2 days until the ceremony. She went directly to the steward's office, her heart in her throat. "Sir," she said to Steward Corwin when he grudgingly acknowledged her, "I need to request an advance on my wages. My brother was injured, and I can't afford." "Denied," Corwin said flatly, not even looking up from his ledgers. "Palace policy. No advances for servants." "But sir, please. It's an emergency. He's at the healer's cottage, and I can't afford." "Not my problem, Omega." Now Corwin did look up, his expression completely unsympathetic. "If you can't manage your finances, that's your own failing. Now get out. I have a royal mating ceremony to prepare for." Sarah left, her vision blurred with tears of exhaustion and despair. No one would help her. No one cared. She was Omega beneath notice, beneath compassion, beneath basic decency. Just like Kale was beneath true acknowledgement, despite being a prince. She found herself wandering the palace corridors without direction until her feet carried her to a familiar place, the library. And standing in the center of it, dressed in formal attire that looked more like funeral clothes, was Prince Kale. Their eyes met across the empty space. His face was pale, his expression utterly lost. The ceremony was in 2 days. 2 days until he would be bonded for life, trapped, silenced, erased. Before Sarah could second-guess herself, she crossed the library floor and began signing. "Are you all right?" Kale's hands moved slowly. "No, but I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Sarah signed back, though even as she did, she felt the hypocrisy. She had no choices either. "Do they?" Kale's signs were bitter. "You're Omega. I'm mute. We're both trapped by what we are." Sarah wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. They were both prisoners of circumstances beyond their control. They stood there in shared helplessness, 2 souls, drowning in a world that refused to see them. Then Sarah thought of Finn, lying injured and vulnerable. Thought of herself, scrubbing floors for wolves who treated her like dirt. Thought of Kyle, about to be bound to a woman who looked at him with contempt, and something inside her snapped. "What if we weren't trapped?" she signed suddenly. "What if we could just leave?" Kale stared at her. "Leave? Run away. Tomorrow night, the night before the ceremony, before anyone can stop us." The idea was insane, but once spoken, It took root in her mind with fierce urgency. You don't want this mating. I can't survive here anymore. So what if we just didn't stay? That's impossible, Kale signed. But there was something dawning in his expression. Something like hope. They'd hunt us down. My father would send trackers. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But at least we'd have tried. At least we'd have chosen for ourselves. Just once. For a long moment, Kale didn't respond. Then his hands moved, slow and deliberate. Where would we go? I have a grandmother, Sarah sighed, adrenaline flooding her system. In the Wildwood territories, near the border, she left the Crystal Moon Pack years ago, lives completely off the grid. If we can get there, we can hide until she hesitated, until we figure out what to do next. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan I have. Sarah met his gaze steadily. And I'm not even suggesting it just for you. My brother needs expensive healing, and the steward refused to help. I can't stay here and watch him suffer while I scrub floors, so I'm leaving. With or without you. She paused, then added, but I'd rather not leave you to a lifetime of misery if there's another option. Kyle's hands shook as he signed. If we're caught, I'll be disinherited. You'll be imprisoned, probably worse. They'll call it kidnapping. Treason. I know. I'm terrified. Sarah's signs were honest, vulnerable, but I'm more terrified of watching you walk into that ceremony hall in 2 days. A sound escaped Kale, something between a laugh and a sob. His hands moved slowly. I've been trying to convince myself to go through with it, to be brave, to sacrifice myself for duty and honor. He paused. But I don't want to be brave. I want to be free. Then let's be free, Sarah signed. Together. Kale stared at her, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to name. Then, all right, let's do it. When? Tomorrow night, Sarah signed. The night before your ceremony, when the palace is focused on final preparations. We'll have the best chance then. How do we footsteps in the corridor outside made them both freeze. Sarah grabbed Kyle's hand instinctively, pulling him behind a shelf. They stood pressed together in the shadows as a servant passed by, completely oblivious. When the footsteps faded, Sarah realized she was still holding Kyle's hand. She started to pull away, but his fingers tightened gently, keeping her there. Thank you, he signed with his free hand. For this, for seeing a way out when I couldn't. Thank you for trusting me, Sarah signed back. They separated reluctantly, and Sarah explained her plan. They'd meet in the library at midnight tomorrow. She'd prepare supplies. They'd use the servant passages to reach the eastern gate during the shift change. From there, it was a 3-day journey to the Wildwood border. It's dangerous, she admitted. But it's a chance. A chance is more than I had this morning, Kale signed, something like wonder in his expression. As Sarah left the library, her mind was already racing through logistics. She'd need food, water, warm clothes, a map. Maven would help, she had to. Sarah had confided in Maven that morning about Finn's injury and her desperate situation. The older woman was the closest thing to family Sarah had in the palace, and she deserved to know the truth about the escape plan too. That evening, Sarah found Maven in the kitchens and told her everything about Kale, about the betrothal, about the plan to run. Maven listened with an increasingly troubled expression. Oh, child, she said when Sarah finished. This is dangerous. If you're caught. I know, Sarah interrupted. But Maven, I can't stay. Finn needs help. I can't afford to give him here. And the prince, her voice broke slightly. He's drowning, and everyone's just watching it happen. Maven studied her for a long moment. Then she sighed. All right. I'll help. But you'd better not get yourself killed, girl. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Maven pulled out an old traveling pack and began filling it dried meat, bread, a water skin, medical supplies, a worn but serviceable map. There's an old path marked here, Maven said, pointing. Mostly forgotten. And take this. She pressed a small pouch of coins into Sarah's hand. It's not much, but it'll help. Maven, I can't take your savings. Yes, you can. You just did. Maven's expression softened. You're doing a brave thing, Sarah. A foolish thing, maybe, but brave. Now go rest. You'll need your strength tomorrow. The next day, the day before the ceremony, crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah went through her work mechanically, scrubbing floors and washing dishes while her mind raced ahead to midnight, to freedom, to the unknown. That afternoon, Lady Isadora requested tea in the Eastern Garden and specifically requested the little silver-haired Omega to serve it. Sarah's stomach dropped, but she had no choice. She carried the tray to the garden with growing dread, and her fears were confirmed the moment Isadora opened her mouth. I saw you, Isadora said without preamble, at the gathering, using those hand gestures with my betrothed. Lady Morgana had clearly reported the library incident to Isadora. The noble woman had spies everywhere. It was just conversation, my lady, Sarah said carefully. Was it? Isadora's voice turned cold as winter. Let me be clear, Omega. I don't know what fantasies you've been entertaining, but they end now. You will not speak to him again. You will not approach him, acknowledge him, or communicate with him in any way. If you see him in the corridors, you will turn and walk the other direction. Is that understood? Every word felt like a slap. I understand, my lady. Good. Isadora's smile was false and cruel. It would be unfortunate if there were any misunderstandings about your role here. After all, accidents happen in large households. Omegas have been dismissed for much less. The threat was crystal clear, but as Sarah left the garden, she felt a fierce satisfaction. By tomorrow night, Isadora's threats would be meaningless. By tomorrow night, she and Cale would be gone. Midnight came too slowly and too fast. Sarah met Cale in the library as planned, the pack slung over her shoulder. He changed into dark, practical clothes, clearly taken from a servant's closet, and his face was pale but determined. Ready? Sarah signed. Ready, Cale confirmed. They slipped through the servant passages, moving quickly and quietly. The corridors were familiar to Sarah. She'd spent 3 years learning every hidden pathway, every secret door. It was her invisible highway through a palace that tried to ignore her. They emerged near the kitchens. Maven was waiting, pressing a warm hand to Sarah's cheek. Be safe, she whispered. Both of you. Then they were moving again, toward the eastern gate. A storm was building on the horizon, dark clouds rolling in perfect cover for their scent trail. The eastern gate had 2 guards, both distracted with shift change protocols. The ceremony preparations had stretched resources thin, with half the usual patrol pulled to handle other duties. Sarah and Cale slipped through the delivery entrance. An old lock Sarah knew how to force, and then they were outside the palace walls. The forest loomed ahead like a promise or a threat. We're really doing this, Sarah thought, dizzy with adrenaline and terror. Cale's hand found hers, his grip tight. He signed with his free hand, "Thank you. For this. For everything." "Don't thank me yet," Sarah signed back. "We have a long way to go." A howl rose from behind them, then another. The alarm had been raised. "Run," Cale signed urgently. They ran. The sky opened up, rain pouring down in sheets that soaked them within seconds, but also washed away their scent trail. The forest swallowed them, dense undergrowth tearing at their clothes. Behind them, howls multiplied. The pack's elite trackers had begun their hunt. But Sarah and Cale didn't stop. They crashed through the undergrowth, following game trails by instinct and luck. The storm worked in their favor with the flooding in the southern quarter, and ceremony preparations stretching resources thin. The full force of the pack's trackers wasn't mobilized immediately. Hours later, soaked and exhausted, they finally stopped at a hidden hollow Cale remembered from childhood his mother's secret place, where she'd brought him to hide from the world. "My mother used to bring me here," Cale signed as they huddled inside. "Before she died. She said it was our secret place." They listened to the trackers pass by in the rain, searching in the wrong direction. When the voices faded, Sarah felt tears of relief mixing with rain on her face. "We made it out," she signed. "First part anyway," Cale signed back. Then, slowly, "I meant what I signed earlier. Thank you. You gave me something I've never had a choice. The ability to decide my own fate. You deserve that," Sarah signed. "Everyone does." They settled in to wait out the storm, two runaways from a world that had tried to erase them. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, they didn't feel quite so alone. They left the hidden hollow at first light, muscles stiff from sleeping on damp earth but hearts lighter than they'd been in years. The storm had passed, leaving the forest dripping and misty. Sarah consulted Maven's map. "We need to reach the boundary river by nightfall," she said, signing simultaneously. "Once we cross into neutral territory, the crystal moon trackers will have less authority." "Less doesn't mean none," Cale pointed out, but he nodded agreement. They moved carefully through the forest, following game trails and staying off main paths. Sarah taught Cale how to walk quietly, how to read signs of recent passage, skills her grandmother had taught her as a child. Cale, in turn, showed surprising physical capability. Years of combat training his father had insisted on had given him strength and agility, even if his endurance for long-distance running was poor. Around midday, they heard it. Distant howls, definitely closer than last night. "They're tracking us," Kyle signed, anxiety tightening his features. "The rain should have washed our scent away," Sarah signed back, confused. Then understanding dawned. "Unless they have something of ours to track from." "Did you leave anything in your room?" Cale's face went pale. "My journal. I forgot it in my desk drawer." A journal would carry his scent perfectly. Sarah's mind raced. "We need to move faster, and we need to cross water, lots of it. Break the scent trail completely." They pushed their pace, half running through the forest. By afternoon, they reached the boundary river wide, dark, and fast-flowing. A fallen log bridged the gap, old and moss-covered but seemingly sturdy. "I'll go first," Sarah decided. "Test if it holds." She stepped onto the log carefully, arms out for balance. The wood was treacherous, slippery. Halfway across, her foot slipped. She gasped, windmilling her arms. Strong hands caught her from behind. Cale had followed, his grip firm and steadying. Their gazes locked, and despite everything, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. "Thank you," she signed with one hand. "Always," he signed back. They made it across together. On the far bank, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. They were in neutral territory now. They'd made it this far. Then a howl cut through the air. "Close. Too close. Run," Cale signed, already pulling her forward. They crashed through undergrowth, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, more howls rose, at least 3 distinct voices. The trackers had found them. Sarah's lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead. She could hear Cale's labored breathing behind her, knew he was struggling. Neither were distance runners trained for this kind of pursuit. The forest opened into a rocky clearing. Sarah skidded to a halt, dread washing over her. They'd reached a cliff edge, a sheer drop of at least 50 feet into a ravine below. There was no way forward, no way around, only back toward the howls. "We're trapped," Cale signed, his face pale. Sarah's gaze caught on a narrow ledge, barely visible, running along the cliff face about 10 feet down. "If they could climb down, can you climb?" she asked. Cale looked startled as he realized her plan, but he nodded. "Not well, but yes. Then we're going down." They had just started the descent when the trackers burst into the clearing. 3 wolves in shifted form, massive and terrifying, and standing between them, still in human form, was someone Sarah recognized. Captain Thorn, head of the Alpha King's elite guard, the most skilled tracker in the Crystal Moon Pack. "Prince Cale," Thorn called, his voice reasonable, his gaze tracking their positions on the cliff face with awareness that made Sarah's stomach drop. He could see exactly what they were planning. "Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Come back with us. Your father isn't angry, he's worried." Sarah glanced at Cale, clinging to the cliff face beside her. His expression was torn. "It's a trap," Sarah signed quickly. "He's saying what you want to hear. The Omega Girl is filling your head with foolish ideas," Thorn continued, and Sarah caught the way his attention flickered to their signing hands. A moment of comprehension before he masked it. "But if you come back, now, we can smooth this over. We'll say you were coerced. The girl will be punished, but you'll be forgiven." "He's lying," Cale signed to Sarah. "Your Highness, be reasonable," Thorn said, taking a step closer to the edge. "That ledge won't hold, and even if you escape now, we'll just follow. You can't run forever." He was right, Sarah realized. They'd be caught eventually. Unless… "Cale," she signed, "I need you to trust me. When I give the signal, we jump." Surprise flashed across Cale's face. "Into the ravine? That's a 50-foot drop. There's a river below. Deep water. If we hit it right, we might survive." She met his gaze steadily. "And even if we don't, at least we go on our own terms." "What are you planning?" Thorn demanded, watching their hand movements with dawning understanding and alarm. Cale stared at Sarah. In his expression, she saw fear, but also determination. "Trust. On 3? He signed. "On 3. "Prince Cale, don't!" Thorn started forward. 1, 2, 3. They jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. Sarah felt weightless, free, in the most terrifying way. She saw Cale beside her, his hand reaching for hers. Their fingers connected just before they hit the water. The impact drove all air from Sarah's lungs. Cold enveloped her, dragged her down. She lost grip of Cale's hand, tumbled in the current. Her chest burned, screaming for air. Then Cale's arm was around her waist, pulling, kicking upward. They broke the surface together, gasping, choking. The current swept them rapidly downstream, away from the cliff, away from the trackers. Sarah caught a glimpse of Thorn staring down in shock before a bend took them out of sight. They were swept along for what felt like miles, occasionally grabbing rocks to catch their breath. Finally, the river widened and slowed. They dragged themselves onto a muddy bank, collapsing in exhaustion. Every muscle in Sarah's body screamed in protest, bruises already forming from the impact. Every step would send pain, shooting through her legs for days. Beside her, Cale winced as he moved, clearly in similar agony, his ribs aching from what were likely cracks or fractures from the fall. "That was insane," Cale finally signed, his hands shaking. "We could have died, but we didn't." Sarah signed back, starting to laugh despite herself. They'd done it. They'd actually escaped Captain Thorn. They were alive, free, together, and completely lost. The river had carried them far off course. Sarah had lost Maven's map somewhere in the water. They were soaked, freezing, bruised, and had no idea where they were. Thunder rumbled overhead. Within seconds, rain began to fall again. Kale gave her a look that managed to be both exasperated and amused. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling, because Kale was making light of their situation, being himself. "Come on," she signed. "We need shelter." They stumbled through the rain-soaked forest until Kyle spotted a structure through the trees, an old abandoned cottage, mostly intact, with a sound roof. Inside, Sarah found dry wood and coaxed a fire to life. They changed into less wet layers from the pack miraculously. Some items in Kale's jacket pockets had survived relatively dry and wrapped themselves in dusty blankets Kale found in a storage room. As warmth seeped back into their bones, Kale sighed. "I can't believe we jumped off a cliff. I can't believe it worked," Sarah admitted. "I gave us maybe 30% chance of survival." 30%? Kale's eyebrows rose. "And you still suggested it? Better than zero." She paused, then signed seriously. "You deserve freedom. I wasn't going to let Thorn take that away." Kyle's hands stilled. Emotion shone bright in his eyes as he signed. "You care about me." It wasn't a question. Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. Yes. Is that strange? We've only known each other a few days." "It feels longer," Kale signed, his expression soft. "Like I've known you forever. Like you're the first real thing in a world full of pretense." Sarah's breath caught. "Kale, I care about you too," he signed quickly. "So much it terrifies me. You're not just the person who helped me escape. You're the person who makes me believe I'm worth escaping for." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. She reached out, taking his hands in hers. "You are worth it," she said aloud, making sure he could read her lips. "You are worth everything." For a moment, neither moved. Then Sarah was kissing him, desperate, intense, full of emotions she couldn't sign fast enough. When they broke apart, both were crying, laughing, holding each other like lifelines. The kiss tasted of river water and hope, of freedom and fear, and something Sarah was terrified to name, but couldn't deny. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them. They lay near the fire, Kale's arm around Sarah's waist, protective and gentle. "Sleep," he signed against her back. "I'll keep watch." But within minutes, both were asleep, safe and warm despite their circumstances. Hours later, Sarah woke to find Kale at the window, his posture tense. "What's wrong?" she signed groggily. "I heard voices, distant, but getting closer." Sarah joined him, peering out. Through morning mist, she saw movement between trees, too deliberate to be random. "We need to go. Now." They gathered their meager supplies and slipped out the back. The forest seemed different in daylight, less menacing but more exposed. Their supplies from the cottage, a few pieces of old jerky they'd found, and a nearly empty water skin would barely last the day. Then Kale grabbed her arm, pointing upward. Carved into a tree trunk was a symbol, 3 wavy lines crossed by an arrow. "Wildwood territory markers," Sarah signed excitedly. "We're close." They followed the markers with renewed hope. By midday, they broke through trees into a clearing. On the far side stood a small village, and on a post, "Welcome to Wildwood territory." They'd made it. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. They'd actually done it. Against all odds, they'd escaped. "Now what?" Kale signed. "Now we find my grandmother." They approached the village cautiously. An elderly wolf directed them to Grandmother Mira's cottage, the one with blue shutters. When Mira opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Sarah, is that really you?" "Hello, grandmother," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, but we need help." Mira's gaze shifted to Kale, taking in his noble bearing. his ruined formal clothes. Understanding dawned. Both of you, inside. Quickly. She glanced around before closing the door. You're being followed, aren't you? How did you? I've been around long enough to recognize runaways. Mira gestured for them to sit. Now, tell me everything. So they did. When they finished, Mira was silent for a long moment. Then she pulled out a worn leather-bound book. I need to tell you something, she said, her hands moving in fluent sign language as she spoke. Of course, she'd been the one who taught both Sarah and Finn years ago, before she'd left the pack. About why I left Crystal Moon Pack, and about Prince Kael's mother. Kael and Sarah exchanged confused glances. You knew my mother? Kael signed. I was her personal healer. Mira confirmed. And when she died, when they said it was an accident, I knew the truth. She opened the book, filled with pressed flowers and handwritten notes. Your mother was poisoned, Prince Kael. Slowly, over months. The room went deathly still. Kael's face drained of color. Who? Sarah whispered. I could never prove it, Mira said heavily. But I had my suspicions. A noble family who wanted their daughter positioned as next Luna. A family with access to rare poisons. A family named Blackwood, Kael signed, his hands shaking with fury and grief. Isadora Blackwood's family. Mira nodded. After your mother died, I tried to tell your father. But the Blackwoods had already spun their story. Tragic accident. Grieving widow. No one to blame. Alpha Aldrich was too lost in grief to listen. So I took my evidence and left, hoping someday it would matter. Kael's hands didn't move for a long moment. When they finally did, they were shaking so badly, Sarah could barely read the signs. All these years, I thought she just fell. I blamed myself for not being there, for not hearing her if she called out. His face crumpled. And they murdered her. They murdered her. Sarah pulled him close as grief shook through him, his silent sobs wrenching her heart. She held him while he shattered, while 16 years of buried pain and guilt poured out in waves. When he finally composed himself, his signs were filled with cold determination. This changes everything. If we can prove the Blackwoods killed my mother, then your betrothal to Isadora is based on murder and lies, Sarah finished. And your father will have to listen. But you can take this to someone with authority to investigate, Mira said. Elder Rowan of the Council of Alphas. He meets in Silver Falls, 4 days' journey from here. He owes me a favor and has no love for the Blackwoods. She wrote a letter and pressed it into Sarah's hands along with her journal. Give him these. Tell him everything. She packed them new supplies. Food, water, warmer clothes, a detailed map, and a small pouch of gold. For your brother's healing, she said to Sarah, and for your journey. As they prepared to leave, Mira pulled Sarah aside. That prince of yours. You love him? Sarah felt her cheeks heat. Yes, I think I do. Mira smiled sadly. Then fight for him, child. Fight for both of you. Don't let the world make you invisible. Make them see you. As sunset approached, Sarah and Kael left the cottage, heading toward Silver Falls. Behind them, Mira watched until they disappeared, then quietly barred her door and prepared for the trackers she knew would arrive soon. In the forest, Kael reached for Sarah's hand. Are you scared? Terrified, Sarah admitted, but also hopeful. Hopeful is good, Kael signed, squeezing her hand. Hopeful means we haven't given up. Never, Sarah signed back. They walked into the gathering darkness, two souls united by circumstance and choice, carrying evidence that could change everything. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger. But they weren't alone, and somehow that made all the difference. They traveled for 2 days without major incident. Sarah and Kael foraged as they went, berries, edible roots, water from streams. It wasn't much, but it kept them moving. Despite protesting muscles and lingering pain from their cliff jump, they pushed forward. Every step sent dull aches through Sarah's bruised legs, and Cale was limping noticeably, his ribs still aching from what were likely cracks from the fall. But adrenaline and determination overrode their bodies' protests. On the morning of the third day, Kyle touched Sarah's arm, signing urgently, "Someone's following us." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Are you sure? I keep hearing footsteps, always at the edge of hearing, always behind us." They picked up their pace, but the sensation persisted, that prickling awareness of being watched. By afternoon, Sarah heard it too, the snap of a twig, the rustle of movement that wasn't wind or wildlife. They were being hunted. "We need to lose them," Sarah signed. "There's a rocky area ahead according to the map. Harder to track scent there." They scrambled across stone outcroppings, deliberately stepping in streams, doing everything they could to break the trail. But the pursuer was skilled. The sounds never quite faded. As sunset approached, they spotted a cave, small, easily defensible, with only one entrance. They ducked inside, backs against cool stone, makeshift weapons ready. Cale had a broken branch, Sarah a sharp rock, pathetic, but better than nothing. Footsteps approached. Stopped outside the cave entrance. "Prince Cale," a familiar voice called. "Sarah, I know you're in there." "Captain Thorne." Sarah's stomach dropped. Cale's grip tightened on his makeshift weapon. "I'm alone," Thorne continued. "No trackers, no warriors. I just want to talk." "It's a trap," Sarah signed. "Probably," Cale agreed. But then his hands moved slowly. "But what if it's not?" After a long moment, Thorne stepped into view at the cave mouth, hands raised, empty. "I'm not here to drag you back," he said. "I'm here because," he hesitated, "because when I saw you jump off that cliff, I realized something was very wrong. You can understand me?" Cale signed, surprise evident in his expression. "I learned sign language years ago," Thorne said quietly, his gaze following the signs with practiced ease. "Your mother taught me. Before she died, she made me promise to watch over you, to understand you when others wouldn't." Sarah saw shock flash across Cale's face. "I've been following orders for 20 years, Thorne continued, his voice heavy with regret. "But when you jumped, when I realized you'd choose death over that betrothal, I knew I'd failed your mother's request. I sent word to your father immediately." His response changed everything. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked warily. Thorne pulled out a sealed letter, tossed it gently into the cave. "From Alpha King Aldrich. Read it." Cale picked it up with shaking hands, broke the seal, and unfolded the parchment. His eyes moved rapidly across the words. Then his hands fell to his sides, the letter fluttering from his grip. Sarah snatched it up, reading. "My son, when you ran, when I realized you'd rather die than marry Isadora, it shattered me. I saw, for the first time, how badly I'd failed you. How I'd let politics and tradition blind me to your suffering. Your mother would have been ashamed of me. I'm ashamed of me. The betrothal is canceled. I've begun learning sign language Captain Thorne is teaching me, though I'm a poor student. When you're ready to come home, if you're ready, I want to hear everything I've missed. Everything I should have been listening to all along. I cannot undo the years I failed you, but I can try to do better." Your father, Sarah, looked up at Cale. His face was wet with silent tears. "He means it," Thorne said quietly. "I've never seen Alpha Aldrich so broken. He's been learning signs day and night, demanding answers about why no one taught him years ago. Thorne paused. He wants his son back. The real one, not the silent prop everyone pretended you were. Is this real?" Cale signed to Sarah, his hands trembling. "Or am I dreaming?" Before Sarah could answer, Thorne spoke again. "There's more." King Caspian, Isadora's brother-in-law from the Eastern Territories, sent evidence that Isadora has been lying about Prince Kale's wishes for months, claiming he'd agreed to things he never agreed to. Putting words in his hands, the Council of Alphas is launching an investigation. Sarah felt vindication surge through her. I knew she was doing that. You were right. Thorne's gaze shifted to Sarah. You were right about a lot of things. About how we were treating the prince. About how he deserved better. He paused. Alpha Aldrich wants to meet you. The Omega who saw what none of us could. Breathing hitched in Sarah's throat. Why? Because you did what we should have done years ago. You listened. They emerged from the cave cautiously. True to his word, Thorne was alone, no other trackers in sight. The jump had bought them time. Thorne's team had spent hours searching for bodies downstream, never imagining they'd survived. By the time the trackers realized they were alive, Sarah and Kale had gained a full day's head start. So what now? Sarah asked. Now, Thorne said. You finish your journey to Silver Falls. Elder Rowan is expecting you. Grandmother Mira's letter arrived yesterday. Alpha King Aldrich called an emergency session 3 days ago, demanding the council convene to address his son's disappearance and the Blackwood betrothal. Your timing is fortunate, or perhaps fate. He looked at Kale. And after you? Speak with the council. You decide if you want to come home. What about you? Kale signed. I'll report that I found you safe, heading to present evidence to the council. And I'll tell your father you'll return when and if you're ready. Thorne inclined his head respectfully. Your Highness. Sarah. Then he melted back into the forest. Sarah and Kale stood in stunned silence. Do you believe him? Sarah finally signed. I want to, Kale admitted, but I'm afraid to hope. Then we go to Silver Falls first, Sarah decided. Present the evidence about your mother's murder. Let the council investigate. And then we decide what comes next. Kale nodded slowly, then signed. Together? Together? Sarah confirmed. They reached Silver Falls 2 days later, their bodies protesting every step, but their spirits lighter than they'd been in weeks. The supplies from Mira's cottage had run out the day before, making the sight of the bustling town all the more welcome. The town was larger than Sarah expected, filled with wolves from various territories. The council hall dominated the central square, an imposing stone building that radiated authority. Inside, they were led to Elder Rowan's office. He was an older wolf with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sarah and Prince Kale, he greeted, his hands moving in fluent sign language as he spoke. Mira's letter was illuminating and troubling. Please, sit. Tell me everything. They did. When they finished, Rowan studied Mira's journal for a long time. This evidence is compelling, he said finally. Circumstantial in places, but compelling. If what you say is true, if the Blackwoods poisoned Queen Alara to position their daughter as next Luna, then this is one of the most serious crimes imaginable. Can you investigate? Sarah asked. The Council of Alphas is convening tomorrow morning, Rowan said. Alpha King Aldrich is present. As you know, so are representatives from the Blackwood family. We can confront them with this evidence immediately. He paused. The Blackwoods had bribed key witnesses 16 years ago, destroyed records, intimidated anyone who knew the truth. It took Mira's courage to preserve this evidence, and your courage to bring it forward. Now, with the Council's authority and immunity promises for witnesses, we can finally break through the wall of silence they built. My father is here? Kale signed, anxiety and hope warring in his expression. He arrived 5 days ago, distraught about your disappearance. Would you like to see him? Kale's hands hesitated, then, not yet. First, I want to face the Blackwoods. I want to see their faces, when they're accused. That can be arranged, Rowan said. The council convenes at dawn. You'll both testify. That night, Sarah and Cale stayed in guest quarters provided by the council. Neither slept well, both too anxious about the morning ahead. What if they don't believe us? Cale signed in the darkness. Then we tried. Sarah signed back. We told the truth. That's all we can do. I'm scared, Cale admitted. Me too. Sarah took his hand. But we'll face it together. The next morning, they stood before the assembled council of alphas, 20 wolves representing the most powerful packs in the territories. Alpha King Aldrich sat among them, and when Cale entered, his father looked at him with such raw emotion that even Sarah felt it. Also present, Lord Blackwood and his daughter Lady Isadora, both looking supremely confident. Elder Rowan called the session to order. We're here to address accusations of murder and conspiracy. Prince Cale, if you would present your testimony. Cale stood. For a moment, he seemed frozen, overwhelmed. Then Sarah touched his arm gently, and he found his strength. His fingers formed the first sign. Captain Thorne, standing near the council, translated aloud for those who hadn't yet learned sign language, though several council members now followed along without assistance. 16 years ago, my mother died. They said it was an accident, but it wasn't. She was poisoned, slowly, deliberately, by someone who wanted her dead, by someone who wanted to position their own daughter as the next Luna. He gestured to Grandmother Mira's journal, now displayed for all to see. This journal contains evidence, pressed samples of the herbs used, notes on my mother's symptoms, a record of who had access to her food and drink, and it all points to one family, the Blackwoods. Lord Blackwood surged to his feet. This is preposterous. A fabricated accusation from a runaway prince and his Omega accomplice. Sit down, Elder Rowan commanded. You'll have your chance to respond. Cale continued, his signs sharp with barely controlled fury. I was forced into a betrothal with Isadora Blackwood. When I tried to object, she spoke for me, put words in my hands, told my father and the council that I agreed to things I never agreed to. She isolated me, threatened anyone who showed me kindness, and tried to trap me in a mating bond built on my mother's murder. Isadora's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. He's lying. He's mute. He can't defend himself from accusations. This Omega has clearly manipulated him. Kyle's hands moved sharply, cutting her off. Thorne translated. I'm not finished. You think I can't defend myself? Watch me. Cale turned to his father. You asked me once why I never objected, why I never fought back. It's because no one was listening. No one ever listened. Until her. He gestured to Sarah. She learned my language, just to talk to me. She saw me when everyone else looked through me. She risked everything to give me a choice, a real choice, not a command disguised as one. Alpha King Aldrich was openly crying now, his hands moving in slow, careful signs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, my son. The council spent the next hour reviewing evidence. Grandmother Mira's journal was examined by healers, who confirmed the herbs described matched symptoms of slow poisoning. Witnesses were called servants who'd seen Lady Isadora speaking for the prince, claiming his agreement on matters he'd never confirmed. And then a messenger arrived with devastating timing, sealed testimony from King Caspian. He'd granted immunity to witnesses in exchange for truth. And several nobles, finally free from fear of Blackwood retaliation, had testified to hearing Isadora brag about her perfect plan to secure the Luna position, even if it meant removing obstacles. The council's investigation also revealed that the royal healer at the time had been bribed by the Blackwoods. His sudden retirement 6 months after the Queen's death now appeared far more sinister. Without Mira's independent records, the poisoning would have remained hidden forever. Lord Blackwood's confidence crumbled. Isadora's defiance turned to panic. The council finds sufficient evidence to warrant a full trial, Elder Rowan announced. Lord Blackwood, Lady Isadora, you are hereby detained, pending trial for conspiracy to commit murder, murder of Queen Alara, and attempted coercion of the Crown Prince. Captain Thorne, please escort them to the holding cells. As guards led the Blackwoods away, Isadora screaming protests, her father stone-faced with rage. Alpha King Aldrich crossed the chamber to his son. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Aldrich's hands moved in slow, simple signs he'd clearly memorized. Can you forgive me? Cale's hands shook as he responded. Can you promise to listen from now on? I swear it. On your mother's memory, I will spend the rest of my life learning to hear you. Kael's face crumpled, and then he was in his father's arms, both of them crying, holding each other like they should have years ago. Sira stepped back, giving them privacy. She found herself tearing up, witnessing this reunion she'd barely dared to hope for. When father and son finally separated, Aldrich turned to Sarah. His hands moved in unpracticed but earnest signs, simple phrases he'd clearly been working to memorize. Thank you for saving my son, for seeing him when I was blind. He saved himself. Sarah signed back. I just helped him find the door. Elder Rowan approached. The council has discussed your situation, Sarah, an Omega who showed more courage and wisdom than most nobles. We'd like to offer you a position liaison between the council and wolves who need advocacy, someone who understands what it's like to be overlooked. Sarah looked startled. I don't know what to say. The position would be based here in Silver Falls. Rowan continued, though you'd travel frequently to various packs. Cale signed quickly. That's an incredible honor, but he turned to Sarah. Only if you want it. If you don't want to return to Crystal Moon Pack, I understand. You've given me so much already. I can't ask for more. Is that what you think? Sarah signed. That I helped you just to walk away? I don't want to trap you, Cale signed. You deserve freedom too. The choice to live your own life. Sarah took his hands in hers, making sure he couldn't look away. Then, let me choose. I choose you, Cale. I choose us. Before Cale could respond, Sarah turned to Elder Rowan. I'm honored by your offer, Elder. Truly. But my heart is in Crystal Moon, where these changes began. If there's a way to serve from there. Actually, Aldrich interjected, his careful signs accompanied by his voice. I had hoped to establish something similar in Crystal Moon Pack, a council of advocacy wolves, chosen not for rank, but for compassion, to ensure no one is silenced or dismissed again. He looked at Sarah. Would you consider leading it? Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Yes, I would. Rowan smiled. Then I graciously release you from my offer, recognizing that sometimes the best advocacy happens closest to home. Aldrich's next signs were slower, clearly practiced specifically for this moment. Will you both return home? To Crystal Moon Pack? Sarah looked at Cale. He looked back at her. Then, in perfect sync, they both signed. Together, the journey back to Crystal Moon Pack took 5 days. Sarah insisted on stopping at the Wildwood border first, where she found Finn, her brother, recovering well at Grandmother Mira's cottage. The gold Alpha King Aldrich had given her far too much, but he'd insisted it was barely a fraction of what you're owed, had ensured Finn received the best healing care available. Maven had visited twice during his recovery, bringing her special ginger biscuits and signing, "You have a remarkable sister," until he laughed. You did it. Finn signed when Sira told him everything. You saved yourself, and a prince, and exposed murderers. Who are you? And what did you do with my careful, head-down sister? She grew a spine. Sarah signed back with a grin. Finn laughed, then turned serious. I'm proud of you. So proud. I couldn't have done any of it without Kale, Sarah admitted. He makes me braver than I am. Then keep him, Finn signed. Anyone who makes you brave is worth keeping. Grandmother Mira embraced them both when they left, whispering to Sarah, You made them see you, child. Now make sure they never forget. When they finally reached Crystal Moon Palace, Sarah was shocked to find the entire pack assembled in the courtyard. Alpha King Aldrich stood at the center, Kale at his side, both waiting. Aldrich's voice carried across the gathered crowd. My wolves, I have an announcement. His hands moved in signs as he spoke simple, carefully practiced phrases he'd memorized with Captain Thorne's help, determined to address his son properly, even if his skill was still rudimentary. For too long, we have judged worth by voice volume rather than character. We have dismissed those who are different, treating them as less than rather than simply as themselves. He gestured to Kale, his signs becoming more confident. My son taught me this lesson at great cost, and so did a brave Omega who saw what all of us missed. He gestured for Sarah to join them. She climbed the steps on shaking legs, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes on her. Sarah showed us that true strength isn't always loud, that wisdom doesn't require status, that those we overlook may have the most to teach us. Aldrich's gaze swept the crowd. In a private ceremony yesterday, I formally elevated Sarah's rank not to noble status, but to a new rank entirely, advocate. Neither Omega nor Beta, but something chosen specifically for its purpose rather than its place in traditional hierarchy. Murmurs rippled through the crowd's surprise, approval, some confusion. From this day forward, Crystal Moon Pack will establish a council of advocacy wolves, chosen not for rank but for compassion, to ensure no one is silenced or dismissed again. And Sarah will lead it. Applause erupted. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but Aldrich wasn't finished. He turned to his son, signing clearly for all to see. Kale, you are my heir, my son, my pride, and I will spend the rest of my life learning to hear you. All of you. Kale's hands moved in response. Thank you for finally listening, for changing. Then Kale turned to Sarah, and his signs were meant for her alone. Will you stay? Not as my father's decree, but as your choice? Will you build this new future with me? Sarah didn't need to think. Her hands moved with certainty. Yes, always yes. The crowd cheered. Someone, Sarah thought it was Maven, started chanting, The Prince and the Omega! The Prince and the Omega! It caught on, rippling through the assembled wolves until the entire pack was chanting their names together. Kale took Sarah's hand, his eyes bright with emotion and hope and possibility. And for the first time in both their lives, they stood in front of a crowd and felt truly, completely seen. 3 months later, the trial had been swift and thorough. Lord Blackwood was stripped of his title and lands, exiled to the furthest territories where he would live out his days in disgrace. Lady Isadora faced harsher justice, imprisoned for conspiracy to murder a queen and attempted coercion of the crown prince. She would spend 20 years behind bars paying for her family's crimes. The Council of Advocacy had processed over 100 requests for assistance in its first 3 months. Wolves, who'd previously been too afraid or too dismissed to speak up. Pack members lined up to learn sign language, and other packs began reaching out to establish similar councils. And today was the mating ceremony. Unlike any Crystal Moon Pack had ever witnessed, this ceremony featured 2 voices, one spoken, one signed. Captain Thorne stood between Sarah and Kale, translating as the prince signed his vows. I promise to see you, to hear you, to choose you every day for the rest of our lives. You taught me that being different isn't being broken. You taught me that love isn't about speaking the same language, it's about wanting to understand. Sarah's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. I promise to stand beside you, never behind you, to amplify your voice, never replace it, to build a world where no one is dismissed or overlooked. Starting with us, when Elder Rowan pronounced them mated, the kiss they shared was witnessed by hundreds, including Finn, standing proudly in the front row, his healed leg strong beneath him. Grandmother Mira dabbed at her eyes. Maven beamed like a proud mother. Even Alpha King Aldrich was openly crying as he watched his son claim happiness he'd almost lost. The reception that followed was a riot of joy. Wolves from every territory had come to witness this union, the Mute Prince and the Omega who'd changed everything. A letter had arrived last week from Sarah's birth pack, an apology, an admission of their failure to see her worth. She'd burned it. Some bridges were meant to stay ashes. Later, Sarah found Kale on a balcony, escaping the crowd for a moment of peace. She joined him, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge over the kingdom they'd helped transform. Are you happy? Sarah signed. Kale's response was immediate. I'm free, which is better than happy. I'm free to be myself, free to love you, free to help others find that same freedom. We did it, Sarah signed, still amazed. We actually changed things. You changed things, Kale corrected. You refused to stay invisible. You made them see not just me, but everyone they'd been dismissing. Below them, the sounds of celebration continued. The Council of Advocacy had already processed 50 requests for assistance from wolves who'd previously been too afraid to speak up. Pack members were lining up to learn sign language. Things were far from perfect, but they were undeniably better. What happens now? Sarah signed, leaning against Kale's shoulder. Now, Kale signed back. We live. We love. We keep fighting for wolves who need advocates. We build the world we wished we'd had. Sounds exhausting. Sarah signed with a smile. Sounds perfect, Kale corrected. He pulled her close, and they stood together under the stars, two souls who'd found each other in the shadows, who'd fought their way into the light, who'd proven that being seen, being heard, being understood was a right, not a privilege. From inside, Maven's voice called, Prince Kale, Sarah, they're about to cut the ceremonial cake. We should go back, Sarah signed reluctantly. In a moment, Kale signed, I want to remember this, standing here with you, knowing we made it. We made it, Sarah agreed, signing the words against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat steady, strong, alive. For a moment longer, they stood there, two souls once dismissed and overlooked, now impossible to ignore. Two hearts once isolated, now completely, perfectly seen. A healer had once suggested that Kale's muteness might be psychosomatic trauma-based rather than physical. Whether he would ever speak remained unknown, a mystery wrapped in childhood pain and loss. But he didn't matter. He had a voice. He'd always had a voice. The world had simply refused to listen, until now. Together, they'd changed not just their own story, but the stories of everyone who came after. Two souls, once invisible, now shining like beacons. Two hearts, once isolated, now bound forever. Together, later, in their private chambers, Sarah and Kale collapsed on the bed in exhausted relief, still in their ceremony clothes. We did it, Sarah signed, unable to stop smiling. We did, Kale agreed, pulling her close. And now we get forever. Forever, Sarah signed back, and for the first time in her life, forever didn't sound scary. It sounded perfect. They lay there in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts beating in sync. Outside, the celebration continued, music drifting through the windows, laughter echoing across the grounds. But here, in this quiet moment, it was just them, two souls who'd been invisible. Two hearts who'd found each other. Two voices once spoken. One sign that had changed a kingdom. Kael's fingers traced gentle patterns on Sarah's arm, then lifted to sign, "Thank you." "For what?" Sarah signed, confused. "For refusing to let me disappear," Kael signed, emotion shining in his gray eyes. "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For teaching me that I was worth fighting for." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again, happy tears. "This time, you taught me the same thing," she signed, "that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. That different isn't broken. That love means truly seeing someone, not just looking at them." Kael leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, in that gesture that had become theirs, intimate, tender, a connection that needed no words. "I love you," Sarah signed against the small space between them. "I love you," Kael signed back, and in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of celebration and the promise of tomorrow, they were finally, completely, perfectly home.